as the city comes apart.
During CNN's New Year's Eve celebration, a drunk Andy Cohen ranted about New York's outgoing mayor, Bill de Blasio. Check this out.
Tell us something, Andy.
Watching Mayor de Blasio
Don't go on a rant.
do his
Don't go on a rant.
victory lap dance
Don't.
after 4 years of the
This is how you
crappiest
want to start
term
the new year.
as the mayor of New York. The
That's how
only
you wanna
thing
start the new
that
year?
Democrats and Republicans can
That's
agree
how-
on
I mean, this
is
is
what
how-
a horrible mayor
is
he
how
has
he-
been.
Wow.
So, sayonara, sucker.
Wow.
2022.
I mean-
it's a new year. Because guess what? I have a feeling
Speaking of
I'm
which-
going to be standing
Speaking
right
of
here
which-
next year. And you know who I'm not going to be looking at? Dancing as the city comes apart. You.
All right, so I'm probably going to spend more time talking about this than I need to because this is just a random drunken rant by a random celebrity on New Year's Eve. Doesn't really matter. But I do find it interesting what this represents because there's no criticism here. Like, what is this actual criticism of Bill de Blasio? There are plenty of criticisms that he could have pointed to, but he's incredibly vague. Now, I will get to what I speculate he is talking about because it tends to be what people in positions of wealth and privilege tend to complain about when they say the city's falling apart. But he did a very similar rant last year as well. So before I show that clip, I just want to show you his tweet this morning saying, "Good morning. I was a bit overserved last night." So here Andy Cohen is admitting that he was obviously drunk. I think that was clear in the video. But now let's see what he said last year about de Blasio, which also very similar.
Oh my God.
Like, that's how I felt when I saw Mayor de Blasio dancing just now.
What are you?
I just don't need to see that at the beginning of 2021. Do something with this city. Honestly, get it together.
So again, incredibly vague. Like, if you're going to make some political comments, at least use your platform. Use the platform that you have to make some valid criticisms. Educate yourself. Say something. But it's all about very vague. The city's falling apart, or it's about his dancing. Okay. I couldn't care less about who's dancing, who's not dancing, how they're dancing. It doesn't really matter when you're the mayor. Ultimately, what matters is what you can do with your power as mayor. And Andy Cohen, though he has an issue with Bill de Blasio, can't seem to point to anything specific. So let me get to, I'll get to here in a second, what Andy Cohen may be talking about, at least as it pertains to what he said last night. But first, of course, Bill de Blasio is not very popular. Outgoing mayor, you see here, this is from June. So a recent poll during his last few months in office. 4% says he's done an excellent job. 21% say good. About 40% say only fair. 32% say poor. And yeah, so he's not very popular. But there are legitimate criticisms and criticisms that are not legitimate of Bill de Blasio. So let me start with what I think Andy Cohen is talking about. And this from Emma Vigeland, who is a New Yorker. So here's a New Yorker perspective on this. This is the sentiment of pretty much every wealthy New Yorker, and the critique is always this vague. Could Andy name 3 things that de Blasio has done that have negatively affected the city? Surely this is not criticism from the left, which of course I'm sure is very true. I don't think Andy Cohen is reading, The Intercept. I don't think Andy Cohen has any real legitimate criticisms of de Blasio, or else maybe he would say them. But he's had at least 2 opportunities here to say something, and he has said nothing but except about his dancing. Now, this is what often they point to, is homicides, is violent crime, is crime in general. Saying, oh, but look, Bill de Blasio cut the police budget, which he didn't. I will show you in a second. But he cut the police budget, and look, deadliest year in nearly a decade, according to the New York Times. New York City saw a massive increase in homicides. Oh my God. Well, let's check the New York Times article, which tells us that violent year in New York and across the U.S. as the pandemic fuels the crime spike. This is not a New York issue. An increase in crime is happening all across the U.S. largely because of the pandemic and the economic situations put a lot of people in. So that is what has led to a massive spike in crime. So it isn't just a New York issue, it's across the country. But ultimately here, they'll say, look, he cut the budget. De Blasio on shifting $1 billion from NYPD. We think it's the right thing to do, said de Blasio in July 2020. Well, that didn't actually happen. So de Blasio reverses course, pledges funding for new NYPD project or precinct, put more money into the police. This money was just moved around. It didn't actually cut the police budget. It was moved around to other areas that still benefited the police. So you had that. You had this. You have this piece in Bloomberg here. NYC's violent crime is up. So is the city's police budget. So you can't point to a cut in the police budget as a reason for a rise in violent crime when the budget has not been cut. It's been increased. But going on here, there are, as I said, legitimate criticisms of Bill de Blasio. And there are in a couple pieces here. I'll link to this below the video. This in New York Times from Michelle Goldberg. The Bill de Blasio disappointment. He began with such progressive promise. Now it's in tatters. This one from Alice Sperry in The Intercept. Bill de Blasio promised to change the NYPD. His courage failed him and us. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio ran as a progressive, but he was never really committed to racial justice or police reform. So the criticisms in both of these pieces is about his very weak approach to the NYPD, his promises about police reform and not delivering. So the right will criticize him, and I guess even liberals will criticize him for being too tough on the police. But the reality is, it's been all talk. There hasn't actually been a real difference when it comes to his approach to the NYPD compared to what he's actually said or campaigned on. So this is why I say the left has real criticism. We look at the actual details. We look at the policy, what he's actually done, while others look at what he has said and then point to that, even though what he says does not actually impact what he has done as the mayor. So this gets to the last bit of this here, where the idea that Eric Adams will be any better. So, you see someone complaining or ranting about how it's great that Bill de Blasio is going to be out. The assumption is that you're assuming that Eric Adams is going to be better. But a lot of people that are very aware of Eric Adams and his history say that that is not going to be the case. So Drew Soren here tweeting out, we can agree de Blasio wasn't great, but I can also say with 100% certainty that Eric Adams will be worse. And there are reasons that people feel that way. So this from Matt Skidmore here with this clip. New York City mayoral frontrunner Eric Adams says, quote, with new technology, you don't need school children to be in a school building with a number of teachers. It's just the opposite. You could have one teacher teach 300 to 400 students. How's that going to work out? All evidence shows us when you have a ton of students and very little teachers, those students learn less. They have less opportunity to actually interact with the teacher, less ability to actually ask questions and learn. So, of course, this is a horrible idea. And he was slammed for this by, all over the place. So one example here, AOC tweeting out at the time, defunding schools to the point that we have a 400 to 1 student to teacher ratio so we can bankroll another huge expansion in an already multi-billion-dollar police budget is how you build a school to prison pipeline. It's reckless and won't make our future better. So Eric Adams has promised to increase funding into the police. Meanwhile, he's talking about cutting schools where you could have one teacher for 400 students. The idea that Eric Adams is going to make New York City better, I don't know. Let's have an open mind. But if this is his approach going in, I don't really see how it's going to be any better than de Blasio. But you also have this. Eric Adams, he's the political candidate of the old political machine. So this is the other criticism of Eric Adams, that he is just one of another member of the status quo. So while de Blasio was taken in by the status quo, did not stand up to them, you have Eric Adams here being of the status quo, of the establishment. Again, what's going to change? So, yeah, this is just, I know this is a lot based on just a random Andy Cohen rant, but it was worth a discussion here as a jumping off point into looking into the actual criticisms of de Blasio and of Eric Adams, and looking at how oftentimes the perception of who somebody isn't the reality of what that person actually has actually done. Just because they have said things doesn't mean they've actually followed through with those things. Just because they're perceived a certain way by the media doesn't mean they actually are that individual. And I think that is absolutely the case with de Blasio. There are legitimate, real criticisms of him, but the ones you often see that deal with especially crime in New York City have absolutely nothing to do with what he has done as mayor. Or if they have, then it's simply because of his approach to the police that is no different than anyone else before him.